6 and I still read names.
You got a different message there.
Yes, they're new. Your wife's name?
True.
Where she went? She was here, man.
Okay.
I got it.
Oh, no, that's like it's
Go to
frozen.
the second one. Hey, there we go. This here clicked on the way you want it.
Yeah. Looks like you need to fix this camera now. Morning. Just a second, I'm sorry.
Tell people that.
This camera is not. The webcam is working now.
Well, I'll just say, in case I don't see you after church, thank you.
Okay. Oh, it's got
Sorry,
back
you're
there
good.
working now. This one it is. Frozen up.
You interview my friends. My interview my friends on Lois and Larry. You interview my friend Lois and Larry.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
So you've known them a while? Or?
Oh yeah. We call her Grandma and Grandpa.
He hasn't gotten back with me yet whether they're going to move or not. He said he'd do it pretty quick. I don't know if they're still here if they've gone back home.
No, they're over her son's house now.
Oh, he's got his stuff?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, they were there for like an hour and a half talking, so I gave them all the information they need.
They like to, you're moving, you're not gonna be there in what, September? No.
Well, they should hope they don't make a decision based on that.
They were thinking,
Nope.
anyway.
You could just do a single screen view and it'll have you and then this will have.
Hello, welcome back.
Yeah, if you sit there, you're talking.
Why are we mic'd up? This is being streamed?
Be careful what you say, huh?
That's okay. Sit over here. Sit by Trudy. She'll say everything's smart.
How are you? Heard your trip was good.
It was good. Glad it's over though. It's good to be back.
Oh, I'm sure it is.
Yeah.
Probably saw a lot of wonderful things though.
Oh my goodness, it's a beautiful country.
It draws you close to nature to God, doesn't it, when you're out there?
They're opposite, but we've got it now.
What says webcam isn't.
You need that one,
Did you have any
We
problems
did,
with your recycling?
All
Does it
right.
have any problems?
With your recycling?
No.
Larry's going to be teaching the class today.
Thank the Lord, because I'm not a mechanic.
And you should be good to go. You should be live. Right down.
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Pastor Steve says we're live. I don't know, I don't see any indication here, but I will take his word for it that we are. And we'll be looking at the third lesson of the quarter, quarterly entitled Making Friends for God. And before we get started, let's pause. Father, be with us this morning as we talk about how to make friends for you and how to be friends for you. Bless us in our comments. May we be inspired to see things that we haven't seen necessarily before. Amen. With us this morning, for those who are not in the room, we have the Roth family over here. And we have Ed and Cheryl Lynn right here. And we have Pastor Roger back from a long trip out west. And we have Trudy and Randy, correct? And I'm Larry Ashcraft. I teach at Highland Academy, and I'll be trying to orchestrate the discussion. I can't function with the mask on. Hopefully I'm safely away from anyone. our lesson title, Seeing People Through Jesus' Eyes, prompts some questions. I initially started jotting things down in my margin. I suppose one of the things that it prompted, and we'll get into this more so later on in the lesson, are we to look at people as potential conquests, as potential spreadsheet statistics? That's a sobering thought, because we all have at times, think, oh wow, the church would look so much better if it were fuller or something. And do you think Jesus ever looked at people as if, okay, here are some statistics to add to our following, my following? I don't think so, but we'll have time to hash that out a little bit later. I'd like to rewind a little bit and go back and talk some about the lesson quarterly title, Making Friends for God. I guess that's kind of a theme running through all of these. And we kind of dealt with that some in the first lesson, the very first one that we had. The first question that immediately comes to mind is, why? Why bother? Why should we feel a passion, a desire, an urging to make friends for God? What difference would that make? I mean, can't we just say, okay, God, I'll say the magic words, I'll say, forgive me for my sins, and he'll say, okay, you're in, and isn't that good enough? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a legal approach to salvation, isn't it? To simply go through the motions and get the things checked off, and that's it. I think we all realize that there's a little more to it. There's this friendship issue. I mean, what's wrong with us, what's broken with us is trust. That's what went bad in the garden. It was a breakdown of trust. It wasn't breaking a rule so much as it was, we used to trust you, God, and now we're out hiding in the bushes. And how that trust issue gets fixed is not by some legal pronouncement. It gets fixed through a relationship as we slowly realize that God is someone I can trust. God is someone who's got my best interest in mind. God is someone who's looking out for me. He's got my back. Only then do we start to place confidence in Him. And that's kind of the issue of the sin problem, is this lack of... Come on in. For those in the viewing audience, Bonnie Haviland just joined us. If I get this to tilt back, there we go.
I think that's an interesting point you brought up about, us trusting God to build a relationship with Him. And I think that's a large part of, you talked about why it's important to make friendships for God. I think the first step to being able to share what we have to share is building that trust relationship with other people around us. Do they really know that we care about them? Do they have that sense that we have something that's trustworthy to share? And that only comes, I think, through, a relationship that builds that trust.
Trust is built through time. You don't fix it like that. I know this is a reoccurring story when one of the kids do something and then they're asking for something that implies trust for which they have not yet earned back. It takes time, right? You're foolish as a parent to immediately say, well, I trust you, even though just yesterday you did this and let me down. They have to earn that back sort of over time. That's what protective parents do, and it's not that God is putting brakes on the building of trust, but we tend to do that. Yeah. We tend to want to get some evidence, get some supporting evidence. Can I really trust God? Not just did he help all these people out of the past, but does he really have my best interest in mind from day to day? Is he really looking out for me?
Somebody might even ask, Larry, that, okay, still, what does that have to do with me making friends with other people for God? But, back to the original question, why bother? Well, God's trying to deal with brokenness, isn't he? I mean, we're broken, and we were, so that implies that his creation is broken, and he created us to be social beings. There's no getting around that. And I can speak to that with some confidence now, because I've been on the road by myself for 7.5 weeks, and it became very evident to me how important people are. There's a loneliness that sets in, even though that's part of the fun I was looking for in my journey. It was so nice to get around people and to talk and to have some kind of connection, even with people I didn't know. And it just reminded me, of that basic design. That was broken with sin. And so when we make friends for the Lord, we're actually helping the Lord complete his mission of restoration, of bringing his creation back into a healthy state. And it's not just about me being saved, it's about, God's creation at large being repaired and restored.
Well, that theme is continued here at the bottom of Tuesday's lesson. If you want to turn forward to there, it's that last full paragraph. The art of effective soul winning is the art of building positive, caring relationships. Think about the people closest to you who may not know Jesus. Do they sense in your life someone who is compassionate and caring? Do they see in you a peace and purpose that they long for? Is your life an advertisement for the gospel? And then he comes right out and says it. We make friends for God by sharing Jesus. They become Christian friends, and eventually, as we share God's end-of-time message of biblical truth, they may become Seventh-day Adventist Christians as well. Immediately when I hear the term making friends for God, a couple of passages come to mind, and it reads differently depending on what version. I'm not trying to promote one version over another, but the KJV uses friends in Romans 5:10. It doesn't in 2 Corinthians 5:18, but the same idea comes across in both of those. I'm going to read both passages very quickly here. I'm reading from a very new translation. Well, the New Testament isn't, but 2 weeks ago, Jonathan Gallagher just finished his personal translation of the Bible, entitled the Free Bible Version, and it's just a very fresh, very accurate rendering of the original languages. Here's Romans 5:10. While we were his enemies, God made us his friends through the death of his Son, and so we can be absolutely sure he will save us through the life of his Son. And 2 Corinthians 5:18, if I can find it here, 18 and 19. God did all this by changing us from enemies into friends through Christ. God gave us this same work of changing his enemies into his friends. For God was in Christ bringing the world back from hostility to friendship with him, not counting anyone's sins against them, and giving us this message to change his enemies into his friends. Very big idea there. We've been tasked with trying to get people to see that God is on our side, that he's a friendly person, that he's somebody who has our best interests in mind. Why should we have to struggle with that?
Well, I think Satan's done his best to try to get us to think otherwise, to think that God doesn't have our best interests in mind. There's that conflict between good and evil. I mean, if there's a good thing, there's also the bad side of it. But I think most people, the devil's done a great job of getting us to believe that God's motives for us are one of be saved, he's gonna burn you alive in hell forever. You know, you have, he doesn't want you to have any fun. You know, he doesn't care if you're suffering. I mean, anything that the devil can do to make us not have a good relationship with God. Because I mean, otherwise, most people would be like, oh yeah, I want all the good things in life. But for somehow we have gotten the idea that what God has to offer isn't in our best interest.
A popular theme for stand-up comics to portray God as someone who's very quick and very much delighted to hurl out lightning bolts and zap us for this. Yeah, we've been subtly programmed over the years to think of the Father as being someone who just isn't that nice. Someone who, well, in all honesty, I might not like being around him throughout eternity. Haven't we all felt that? In essence, we've had a very different picture painted of the Father than the one that we get of Jesus in reading the Gospels. And I guess that's why Jesus' own words come as such a shock when was it Philip that asked in John 14, show us the Father and we'll be satisfied. And Jesus' words were what?
You've seen me, you've seen the Father.
We're the same kind of guys, you know? That's so hard for us to realize, right? They're the same kind of guys.
Larry, I might also add that, not only, like you mentioned, the devil has complicated things. Inadvertently, I think the church complicates things. We talk about, and I can only speak about Adventist churches. That's what I grew up around. That's what I grew up in. But I suspect this is true across the denominations, but particularly with Adventists, I suppose. Because we know we want to be a separate people. We want to be in the world, but not of the world. And so, we kind of learn how to be amongst ourselves and be comfortable with that. And how many of us truly have a multitude of non-Christian friends. So that can complicate things. I think rightfully we want to pull back from the world, but in doing that we pull back from natural friendships, perhaps. At least that was my experience. I can't speak for anybody else. And also, we sometimes, I have found, we tend to make evangelism, I'll put that in quotes, maybe too complicated, when really it should be about making friends. It shouldn't be hard to make friends, but we try to teach people skills in sharing the gospel, and I think we end up unintentionally intimidating people, thinking that sharing Jesus is difficult, that I have to be trained to do it. When really, based on what we're talking about today, the first and primary task is just make friends. Be yourself, be a good Christian, and make friends. It doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. But for some reason, I think, probably for all good intentions, the church has made it a little more complicated than that. More complicated than it should be, perhaps.
We'll come back to that in a couple of pages here, but the corollary question here is in gray here at the bottom of page 25 on Tuesday. How come it's sometimes so difficult to lead family members to see God as a friend? What additional difficulty arises when it becomes a family member?
I think it's partly because they know you. They know your faults and your weaknesses. Sometimes it's easy to get dressed up and go to church and like, oh, I have it all together, and have this certain appearance. When you're dealing with a family member, they see all of the things that you aren't doing well, and it's sometimes harder to do that. Also, because it's very personal. There's, I think another obstacle to coming to Jesus is our own pride. Our own pride of we don't feel like we need to change, and it's hard to tell people, especially when you are a faulted person, that your family is so close to you. They know all your hidden weaknesses, and then for you to tell that person you need to change, it's hard to hear from somebody. You don't. I think sometimes the first people who are closest to you are the ones that we pick on the most. A little bit, we're very straight and direct, and sometimes we're like, well, you need to change, instead of saying, well, here's the joy and experience I've had. We're like, well, I see something in you that needs to change, and that's really hard to hear. It hurts our pride.
I know, yes, Ed?
I want to go back to something you said earlier about, I'm not sure of the words you used, but I think today people, not just outside the world, but maybe even inside the Seventh-day Adventist Church, forgets or they don't remember that the God of the Old Testament was Christ himself. He's the one that was working with everybody. And then when Christ came, they said, oh, well, he's different than God the Father. He's acting different here in the New Testament than he did in the Old Testament. It's the same God.
Indeed. How would that same God respond to a bunch of ex-cons that have been in slavery for 400 years? We often miss, or later on, when they become wrapped up in this idea of, offering their children to these idols. It's very easy to point the finger at God and say, you're not being so nice back then, but look what he had to work with. Oh.
You had to meet violence with violence.
What would have happened if in Sinai, and we'll get to this a little bit later on Tuesday at the top, at Sinai, what would have happened had Jesus come down, as he did to the disciples, and lived and walked among them? Again, these are people who had been in slavery for 400 years. They knew no idea of compassion or right or wrong. It was just survival. What would the Sermon of the Mount, how would that have played with them? Probably not too well. What they would respond to more so would be what happened. A little bit of rumbling, a little bit of fire, a little bit of smoke, to distinguish that, hey, this really is something more than the stones and the sticks and the twigs and all of the Egyptian gods that they would make up, these imagined things and all of that. I don't know, it's very easy for us to cast God in a pretty ferocious light when we read these stories, but look who he was trying to communicate with. Let's get the context there. Same God, same I've got your back kind of God throughout the entire Bible. But we haven't been the same, right? He meets us where we are, and that's the title at the top of Tuesday's lesson. We'll come back to that in just a moment. God meeting us where we're at. But let's hit rewind and go back to Sunday. I'm not really sure what to make of this story. It was interesting. Somebody in social media asked the same question. I don't know if he was looking ahead a couple of weeks to Sabbath School, but asked the same question a week or so ago about this story. I don't think we have it recorded anywhere else, just Mark. But the guy who needed the second touch, you've read this, no doubt. Jesus, he touched his eyes and he asked him, what do you see? I see people walking around like trees. That to me would suggest blurry vision, right? Not being able to discern the finer elements, just blurred. It also suggests that the guy most likely wasn't blind from birth, would it not? Because he wouldn't have known what a tree was like.
Either that or not total blindness. A lot of blindness is, of course, if you just see shadows and light. A lot of blindness is not pitch black. He could have been blind, but still have some awareness of distant shapes or whatever.
What about the two-step process? I don't have any answer for that. I was just wondering if anything came to mind. And I got a comment, which may or may not be.
Do you have the
relevant.
reference, Mark?
It's Mark chapter 8, 22 to 26. It's right there in Sunday's lesson. I can read it right quick. Let's see. Mark 2, that's Mark 8. Mark 8, 22. They went to Bethsaida, where some people brought a blind man to Jesus. They begged Jesus to touch him and heal him. Jesus took the blind man by the hand and took him outside the village. Didn't do it amongst the crowd, right? Let's get out of here and have some privacy, I guess. Jesus spat on the man's eyes and touched him with his hands. Jesus asked him, "Can you see anything?" The man looked around and said, "I can see people, but they look like trees walking," suggesting very poor vision, 2200 or something like that. Jesus touched the man's eyes again. He could see properly. He was cured and his sight was clear. Jesus sent the man home and told him, "Don't go back through the village." What do you make of that?
Well, I can tell you how I've always read it. I don't have any, thus saith the Lord, but I mean, to me, he spits on the guy's eyes, right? He can see, but he can't see clearly. So he lays hands on his eyes again. Isn't it possible that he's just cleaning off the eyes a little bit better? No, you can see. Let me help you out. And, gentle touch just to bring it into focus. The miracle had been done, but Jesus just gave him a little encouraging, let's try again. You can see better than you think you can. That's the way I've always read it. He kind of cleaned his eyes off. The first touch was not on his eyes. The second touch was directly on his eyes. And so I've always read that as just cleaning that spit out of the eyes so he could see.
That's plausible. I like that idea.
Well,
Yes,
his
fine.
friends brought him, so it was their faith. And so maybe that was testing his faith by doing the second time or something.
Well, that's what came to mind to me. He wasn't necessarily coming on his own.
Right.
And the thought occurs, is this guy going to be satisfied with trees walking around? Let me just see where he's at. Is he going to say, "Good enough, I've got it from here, Jesus. Go your way. I'll learn to live with this because this is a whole lot better than what I had." Is he going to be satisfied with that? And the guy comes back, "No, this is not good enough." It wasn't him that was requesting this encounter there. His friends did. I'm not sure. But, just thought I'd run that past and see if, so many times in the New Testament we see medical things taking place and then spiritual analogies connected with that. And I can't help but think that was intentional, that we are to draw analogies between physical healing and our spiritual healing, rather than view it through the lens of a lawyer and acquittal and prosecution and all of that. I know we get lots of imagery in the Bible, but Jesus never used those terms, ever.
Larry, again, I don't have a full explanation of this, but just one idea. It's interesting when God heals people of other afflictions. Sometimes there are people that struggle with alcohol or smoking or other addictions. Sometimes it seems like there are cases that I've heard of where people are healed outright. I mean, they walk away from it and they never have another inkling towards it again. But there's other people that I've known it's a lifelong struggle. And why the difference? I can't fully explain that, but maybe that's a lesson that I can get from this, is that whether you're healed outright, because there's times that we have Jesus heal people with a single word, or maybe more of a process like we see here. The point being is that he's with us for the long haul. Whatever it takes, whether he's able to do it because of our faith, for whatever reason, with a single word, or whether he has to work with us over a period of time, maybe a lifetime. He's there to bring about that ultimate healing, whether it's in an instant or whether it's a process. He'll stay with it to bring healing for us.
Well said. And in terms of the human condition, self-centeredness, right? That is a process, is it not?
It's been around.
Oh, it has. You should come in. It's a process. God doesn't come in and force our wills. Oh, you used to be self-centered, and now you're no longer self-centered. It ends up being a process that he takes us through, leads us through. It shows us how life is so much more interesting when we focus on others and look beyond, the end of our nose and start thinking about others and helping others, and it gets fascinating. And it's really pretty boring when all I can see on my radar screen is me and my and mine. Maybe that's the reason why there's so many depressed people in Hollywood. I don't know. That would be speculative, I guess, for me to say that, but that's kind of how I see it. The top of Monday's lesson says a lesson in acceptance. And I guess that's really where it comes down to day-to-day activity as far as seeing people through Jesus' eyes. It's that of accepting them, taking somebody whose behavior or lifestyle isn't anything similar to ours, and yet probably not figuratively, especially during COVID-19, but actually not literally, but figuratively, we would wrap our arms around them. Now we might bump elbows or something like that. But we want to take them in. We want to accept them. We want to have them feel not distant, that they're ranking up there as somebody important to us. How does that play out from day to day? The first couple of sentences here says, Jesus taught his disciples how to see people through heaven's eyes. His view of people was radical. He saw them not as they were, but as they might become. I know as a classroom teacher, that's what I often want to do. I want to see that future business person or mathematician, or occasionally that future teacher in this student, and to just see what's there and nothing more, it can get a little discouraging. Comments or thoughts there? How do we see people as they are, but then also see them as they could be?
Well, it doesn't start with humility on our own part. Before I can see the good in others, I think I need to make sure that I turn the lens first on myself, make sure I recognize, how much I've benefited from the Lord and what I would be without Him. We tend to be very prideful people because of sin. And I think it does take humility, to see a person who might be struggling, in the moment, and recognize, yeah, me too. I mean, I've been there, and I've been worse. And perhaps that's the first step, just being humble.
Okay, I'm going to make it hard on you, Pastor Roger. How do we go? I think this would be true for most of us, this conservative part of the country here. How do we go about being accepting of somebody who is loud and rude and in your face? They're an activist. They're proud and arrogant. I think we all bristle when we hear that. How do we wrap our arms around them? And I'm saying figuratively. How do we, because the immediate reaction would be, who do you think you are? And then we would be recipient of more criticism and rudeness that they're dishing out. There's a lot of this going on if you've not read the news in the last 6 months or so.
I wouldn't change my answer, Larry. I still think it's humility. I think I'd have to put myself in that. How would I act if I had experienced the same kinds of things that person has experienced, look with an empathetic eye. And I still think it starts with humility. I have to get down off my high horse. And
But what if we're not riding a high horse?
well, then that shouldn't be too much of a struggle, I would think. I don't know. I think we ride a high horse more than we realize we do. At least I do. I can't speak for you, but I think that I surprise myself with how often I ride in the saddle. We need to recognize that when somebody is angry about a situation, that anger comes from something. There's something real there. It's not just manufactured out of thin air. What is the problem? Rather than try to compare that person to me and my experience, am I humble enough to look with an honest view and what is that person experience that would create such emotion and create such energy and such anger? There's got to be something.
And what about the person who sees the chaos going on? They don't really care about the cause, but they look at it as an opportunity to create more chaos.
Yeah.
A lot of that going around out there. Just how do you reach someone like that? Someone who's just a rebel looking for a cause. And here's something I'm going to jump on board with and ride it for as long as I can. And how do you touch someone like that?
Well, I mean, it's challenging, but I think having the maturity to be able to separate, between people as individuals and maybe causes, right or wrong if they're espousing. We don't have to accept, every cause that's put forth. There may be truth to it, there may not. But the Bible does call us to accept people, as sons and daughters of God. We're all hopefully sons and daughters of God in the making, and we all have that common journey. We're all trying to get to heaven and to a better relationship with Him. So, like I say, having the maturity to be able to separate a person in the emotions of the moment, separate that person from maybe a cause that we don't necessarily have to agree with or embrace.
Or even separate that person from their actions, and that's hard to do. I mean, it's easy for us to easy to say it, but it's hard to do. But I think that's what we're called to do.
And with Jesus' ministry, he experienced more of the opposition than I think he experienced the people actually turning towards him. It was more rare. You have fewer stories of you had crowds of people that didn't really truly accept what he had to say. You had a lot of opposition from the church leadership. You had kind of the anti against what he was trying to say. But I think he was always looking for that opportunity. It didn't matter where their starting point. And I think we kind of talked about some different things. God always looks like when we talk about the Israelites. He's looking for that progression in their experience. He's looking for growth. He's looking to make it better continually. And so often we're so focused on the end result. We don't see the desire to start somewhere. It's not a magic switch that turns overnight. One of my hobbies is to train martial arts, and everybody starts as a white belt. You'll come in at different points, different experiences, different things. You don't come in with a lot of training or whatever. You've all been white belts, and you want to progress. And it's a little different because everybody who's training there has a desire to get better. You made that choice. I want to get better. So in a sense there, but your expectation of somebody who's coming in is really different than somebody who's been training for a long time. And you all have that growth experience. Like you're starting, but you're always trying to get better. You're never achieving your final goal. And I think sometimes our Christian walk is like that. It's a struggle. It's a battle. You're trying to get better. And I think part of too is like when you're helping somebody else in their initial experience, you're like, well, I've been there. Here's my struggle. Here's how I deal with it. And they also know you're still learning. You're like, hey, well, here's what I do to do this. I drill this, I do whatever. And I think sometimes our Christian walk is Roger talked about being humble and saying, hey, here's my struggle. Sometimes we're afraid to let somebody know that we're not perfect and we struggle with something. And I remember one time talking to a pastor friend of mine, and he's like, well, here's what I struggle with. And I it kind of took me by surprise. It's like, well, you have, you just to be that open and honest and transparent and say, hey, here's my struggle. And I think sometimes it's okay to say, hey, here's my struggle. God's still working on me. I'm still trying to grow, and I'm happy to help you with your struggle too.
Well, that's a nice lead-in to Tuesday's lesson, which suggests, God meeting us where we are.
Okay, Larry,
Yes, Ed?
you asked the question, what about doing something? How do you reach people that are being disruptive in society? I think you can always use Christ as an example. And what happened one time when he was in his hometown of Nazareth? Mm-hmm. And the people were going to do what with him?
Throw him off the
Throw
cliff.
him off the cliff?
It was a lynch mob.
Huh?
It was a lynch mob.
All right. Did he stay there and try and change their thoughts? What did he do? Sometimes you just have to leave.
Good point. Try again another
Now,
time.
he had the power to change every one of them, but he didn't force his will upon them. They wanted to be that way. There's not much sometimes that you can do with anybody. Do what you can, but then when it goes so far, it's time to leave town.
Well said.
Just throwing it out for thought.
What of this idea of God meeting us where we are, and God seemingly, I shouldn't say seemingly, God definitely coming across as a different person at one point in time, because this group of people were at a different place in their spiritual journey, and then later on he seems to come across a little different, because this group of people, it's easy for some Bible scholars to say that a different God or a different set of rules. Remember, when I was in college, I worked over at the Little Debbie Bakery, and there was a guy I was working with. He went to Tennessee Temple, and he was telling me he was studying theology. He was telling me about this class he was taking on the covenants and dispensations, and he was talking about how there were 7 different covenants and 7 different dispensations, and back during this time you did this to get saved, and back during this time you did this to get... Do we have a God that's so whimsical, roll of the dice, that you do things differently at different points in time? God doesn't change. We've changed, though, right? We've changed. God meets us where we are. And yes, from an outside observer who may not take in everything of what's happening, it might look like God has changed over time, because it looked like he was acting in this fashion back in the time of Noah, and this fashion during Moses, and a different time during... God's the same today, tomorrow, and forever. But we certainly have changed, have we not? Our understanding, our...
It's kind of interesting, like with parents, you think they're the same parents and they have different children, and they may discipline their children differently. Even the best parents, I'm not talking about, psychopaths who purposely favor one child or another, but just really great parents, they discipline their children differently. And it's not because they're different people, it's because that child has different needs, different personalities, different things that they do. And hopefully, again, in the best case scenario with parents, they want the best for their child. And so what they're trying to do is for the best interest of that child, even though it may seem unfair. It's like, why do you take away this one's privileges? Why do you seem like you're more strict with this person? Why does this child have a different bedtime? Again, all these things are tailored for that child. Now, God, the parents didn't change. They're not different people for different kids. They are adapting to grow their child. And ultimately, you want them to succeed. You want them to be a great, have a great childhood, great experience. They're not different people, but they have different needs. And I think sometimes at our Christian walk, different times, they had different needs. They were different understanding of him. He had to introduce himself in different ways. He had to adapt to how to grow this person in a different way.
I'm just reminded of Jesus' interaction with Nicodemus, where it's just like Moses, back to that lifting up the serpent in the wilderness, so even now, the Son of Man will be lifted up, so that whoever believes in him should not perish. It's always been about belief in the Savior. It's always been the same.
And I certainly could be wrong, but I doubt those who were dying of snake bites in the wilderness really got a clear picture of Jesus' message and what he came to bring. It was an object lesson, though.
It was a trust thing.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you, Abraham did though when his hand was stayed from sacrificing his son. He certainly got a clear picture of the sacrifice that God was willing to make ultimately. So even that grace was all the way back at the beginning of Israel's experience with Abraham. It was because he believed he was considered righteous. And Paul holds up that model. I mean, the Bible holds up the Old Testament as the model for Christ all the time. I mean, the idea that there's these different dispensations and different rules and different ways of responding to God, it's not a biblical concept. It's just a convenient way to deal with some legal
popular.
challenges. I know.
It reminds me of drawing out a hopscotch court, and you get good at it, and then the next day, the court's changed, the rules change. You throw the marker somewhere else, and it's a different pattern that you hop. And is God that type of a person? Is he so whimsical that he? Certainly not. And yet, many well-meaning Christians embrace this and say that God has had many different ways of saving us down through time.
It's certainly true, many different ways of dealing with this, but not in ways of saving us. This salvation has always been straightforward and relatively simple. I think a lot of times we underestimate the challenge of God's mission. I mean, he's trying to restore humanity, to change humanity without taking humanity's freedom away. I mean, that's not an easy thing to accomplish, particularly when there is a deceiver, an enemy, who's constantly working to thwart everything he does, every beneficial thing that the Lord gives us. There's a counterfeiter there to offer a substitute that's awfully close, and to pollute the water, so to speak. It's not an easy mission that God has to bring in reconciliation, to bring humanity to the point where we willingly choose to be reconciled. I think he's done a pretty good job considering the odds were against it.
And at different times, he comes across quite differently. We think of Israel going into captivity. And that was over hundreds of years. First Israel, then Judah. I mean, prophesied and threatened and warned so many times by so many of the prophets. And then finally it happens. They get hauled off to Babylon, and they get hauled off to the woodshed. And then when they return, we're not going to get another spanking. And they go so far in the other direction, kind of a overcorrection. By the time Jesus comes along, how many little statutes, how many different rules must they follow to be really good people? Talk about an overcorrection there. We're not going to get hauled off again. We're going to see to that.
I enjoyed your woodshed comment there. Hold off the woodshed, and certainly that's a good way of describing it. We need to also remember, and I know you know this, Larry, of course, but when those who want to be quick to accuse God of perhaps overreacting and treating these people harshly, they forget how many years of warning, very specific warning. How many prophets did he raise up saying this is going to be the result of your decisions? Turn back, turn back, turn back. We see that all through the Bible, all the way going back to Cain. Turn back. Your sin is crouching, waiting to devour you. You need to consider what you're doing. Everything we see from God is warning what the results are going to be if we don't trust Him. And to just take out the if you want to call the correction, the punishment, and not give attention to the warnings is to misrepresent God. And a lot of people have done that, of course, but that's what the Bible's filled with, warnings.
Well, it's interesting to go back and read Moses, and it looks like he's describing them being hauled off into captivity. You know, if you do this, everything will be fine. But if you don't, and it sounds like with prophetic vision, he's describing what's happening many years later.
He's reminding them they're now in a covenant relationship. And this covenant relationship is going to require a certain amount of trust and cooperation on both sides. Covenants, by necessity, require both parties to be engaged in this thing and to accept it, embrace it, do their part. And I get so weary of people talking about the covenant as if it's only one-sided. No. That misunderstands the nature of a covenant. They are to be God's people, and He is to be their God. They meet together for the purpose of revealing, saving God to the world. Israel was required to do something. That's not to say that salvation is by works. No. But to say that all they had to do was just sit back and enjoy the fruits of God's grace and not participate in God's mission is to misunderstand the mission, misunderstand God. They were, back to your comment with Moses, he was reminding them, this is a special covenant relationship. You are privileged to be a part of this relationship. Don't miss this opportunity. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, we've got a whole quarterly on covenants coming up, spring quarter of next year, so we'll have a lot to deal with and hash out there. Wednesday's lesson, dealing with difficult people. Ed?
Dealing with Ed. Is that what you said?
No. Ed said
Why did you pick me up?
well, you spent your career dealing with a lot of difficult people at their doorstep.
Yeah.
Tell us some stories. You have been some over the
To
years.
set the context, Ed was a literature evangelist.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I told the story last week. There's a lot of difficult people. You want an experience? I had one, you say difficult people, every situation is different, whoever you're dealing with, and you have to learn who they are, learn something about them, and then deal with them different than you dealt with the last one. Everybody's different. And I think the Lord helps in every case that I can think of. The Lord had to be the determining factor in the results that took place. And I probably have told this before, and if I have, forgive me, but what just comes to my mind is a young lady and her husband couldn't buy the books from me, and they said she wanted me to go to her parents because her father had just become a Christian and just started going to church. And so I went to their home, and as we first off sitting there, the man reached into my briefcase and pulled out my prospectus on the Conflict of the Ages book, just opened up the front and he said, E.G. White. I wouldn't have those books in my home. Went into the other room to watch TV. But he was close enough, I could see him and I knew he could hear me. He didn't have it up real loud. So instead of canvassing her, I canvassed him. Okay? So I canvassed my presentation to her, but I was working it around words that he would hear. And she just wanted the Bible story, but he came in and I'd canvassed her on the reference library, the Conflict of the Ages, and he said, tell you what, he says, I'll ask you one question. If you can answer it correct, you've got a sale. And I thought, what's this going to be? You never know what they're going to come up with. And so he says, what happens to a person when they die? So I quickly said, I'm going to feel him out. And I said, well, do you want to know what the Bible says, what I think, or what the world says? Just answer the question, was his response. And I said, well, my understanding of what the Bible says is that We go to sleep, and at the second coming, Christ will resurrect us. He said, okay, you got a sale. He bought the whole set. A half hour earlier, I wouldn't have those books in my home. Now, who changed his thinking? That was a miracle.
Yeah.
If you want a modern day miracle, God changed him. Now, yeah, maybe he used me as an instrument to say the right words. I don't remember the canvas. I have no idea what I said, but I was mentally trying to reach him all the way through.
Any other stories? Stories of interacting with difficult people? Pastor Roger, I'm sure you have some over the years.
Yeah, I've had to deal with you before, Larry. I just, no, I'm just kidding. Well, I mean, you're a teacher. You know, a lot of the most difficult people that I've had to deal with has been in a classroom setting. You know, my first career, full-time career, was a teacher. And, you know, teenagers are by nature challenging adults, and they're looking to launch themselves as to be their own independent adults, and that breeds some rebellion. And some of that's good. That's, you know, it teaches them to think for themselves and to think separately from their parents, and they need to think that way. But that doesn't always fit in line with with rules of a classroom and in cooperative learning, all that kind of stuff. So obviously, there's lots of challenges there, and you do need to obviously keep your own mission in mind. I'm here to assist this person in their journey. And if we forget that as teachers, it makes dealing with difficult students a lot more complicated. But when we're reminded, this is my purpose, this is my mission, is to help this person think about God in a different way, think about their world in a new way, and assist them on that journey. And as far as dealing with difficult people and who are not students, sometimes it's hard to keep that mission in mind. I'm just another person trying to get through life too, and this person's becoming an obstacle. But I don't know. I think Ed said it best. Every situation is different. Every situation requires a different approach. The one constant there, though, is that prayerful attitude. Lord, help me in this moment. Help me. And I'm sure some prayers went up as you began that canvas. I'm sure that you were praying without ceasing, even while you were talking. Keep the Lord close.
On Wednesday's lesson, this is the third line of the paragraph below the 3 lines. It says, we call this ability church growth eyes. That rubs me the wrong way. I'll just be right with you. I don't want to be interacting with somebody and say, you're a potential statistic on a spreadsheet. I'm worried about getting that curve to climb a little bit more. I think that'll win no one's confidence. And yet at the same time, I can understand that if you're employed as a church administrator, you tend to think in terms of business and progress, and that's how we measure things. It's how we feel that we're doing the right thing if we don't measure anything like that. But that goes nowhere when you're interacting one-on-one with somebody. I'm worried about church growth, so I want you to listen to me. Really? How do we make sure we don't ever tip our hand, so to speak, and come across that way? Because in all honesty, the size of the church means nothing. What matters is individuals getting to know God as somebody who can change their heart.
Well, I think the lesson offers the answer there. Just the next paragraph down. Ask the Lord to make you sensitive to the ministry of the Holy Spirit in the lives of others, and pray that God will give you the second touch and open your eyes to spiritual opportunity. So, change me, Lord. Help me to see this in a healthy way. And I think, on the surface, looking at it with church growth eyes, that's a little bit at a very surface level. That's it's easy to be cynical about that, and I think that's the wrong approach. But there is a deeper level. Thinking about church growth, not for the benefit of the church numbers, but for the benefit of saved souls, the benefit of of enlarging God's family. I mean, there's a deeper level that if we can get there, and that requires a change. That's why I like the way that's worded. Pray that God will open our eyes to these opportunities. We need to be changed as much as the person we're trying to interact with.
That's summarized on Friday. We're about out of time, but on Friday, right above the middle of the page, there is a prayer. And it says much of what you just said. It says, Lord, I'm willing to be used for the advancement of your kingdom. Open my eyes so that I can see the providential opportunities you are opening before me each day. Teach me to be sensitive to the people around me. Help me to speak words of hope and encouragement and share your love and truth with those who I come in contact with each day.
I think that's it, because it's got to be a lifestyle. It's got to be a way we think and see, because those opportunities generally come at unusual times. You know, you can't schedule evangelism. All right, so I'm going to go out and I'm going to witness for these 2 hours every week. Well, that may not be where the opportunity is. My opportunity may be at work, my coworker, the next cubicle, you know, on a Tuesday afternoon when it's all stressful. You know what I mean? You can't schedule these opportunities. We have to be, you know, we have to have those eyes to see them when they happen. And I think that's what that means when we talk, you know, seeing with church growth eyes is just having an eye for it throughout the day when it's not a part of your normal schedule. That's the way I read it anyway.
Would it be a little less abrasive to say, see things with heavenly kingdom eyes?
Yeah, perhaps. The church growth phraseology I think is what's the issue there. Sure.
Well, we're out of time, so let's pause just a moment before we leave. Father, we've been wrestling with some weighty ideas here this morning, how to convey you to other people, a knowledge of you to other people, because who they think you are very often is not who you are. As Kimberly said earlier, there a lot of lies have been told about you. And help us to reveal you aright. May we always speak of you as Job did and say the right things about you. And certainly we'll get the commendation that Job got in the end, that we spoke the truth about you. Give us those words to say, Lord, and to recognize the opportunities. Amen.
Thank you, Larry.